So welcome back to Everything Marketplaces. If you're new here, we talk with marketplace founders and leaders as guests for our Everything Marketplaces group chats every week. So this is episode 41, and I'm really excited to welcome on Joanna McFarland, who is currently the co-founder and CEO of HopSkipDrive. So if you're not familiar with HopSkipDrive, it is a leading marketplace platform that simplifies the transportation and logistics involved with transporting kids to and from extracurricular activities in schools. So HopSkipDrive is a very interesting marketplace, and it has evolved quite a bit over the past few years. So super excited to chat with Joanna today, and I'll learn more about it. So Joanna, welcome to the group chat, and it's great to have you join us here today. We have quite a bit to talk about, but maybe before we jump into it, if you could share a little bit more on your background and what led you to start HopSkipDrive, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I had no intention of starting a company, let alone a marketplace. I started my career in investment banking and private equity many years ago. Went to business school because I really liked the operating side of the world and had dragged my now husband from Texas, where he was from. He went with me to business school. I dragged him up to the Bay Area. He got to pick where we went next. He's a writer, so he picked LA. So we've been here now for 15 years. And I moved into tech when we got here, and I was doing product management and business development for a number of tech companies here in LA. The same time, I was growing, products and launching businesses. I was growing my family. I have two boys and was feeling very guilty as a full-time working mom that I couldn't get them places. I literally just wanted to get my son to karate on Thursday at 3 o'clock. And I had no way of doing that. I didn't need a nanny. He was in school. I just needed to get him there. Was at a birthday party. All the moms were standing around talking about, challenges, and transportation was the challenge of the week. And everybody had a version of the transportation struggle. And I very jokingly said we should throw money in a hat and buy a van and hire the stay-at-home moms in the neighborhood to drive our kids around. And my co-founder looked at me and said, "Oh my God, how do we do that? I'm dying." And so there's three of us that came together. We're all moms. We have 8 kids between us, and really started the business as a way to solve our own problem as parents, and started this as a consumer business and as a consumer marketplace where we were matching very highly vetted drivers with families. And so there was a whole component to that marketplace that really, trust and safety is the core of everything that we do. And about a few years ago, we actually realized that the solution that we had built for families and all of the safety features that we had built is actually highly extensible to school districts and to county governments who have very large transportation challenges themselves. And so have really, I don't want to say pivot because we still have the consumer business, but have really transitioned into being primarily from a consumer marketplace into primarily being a B2B marketplace. And we now contract with almost 300 districts and counties across 8 states plus DC.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing more on that. That's quite the story. I definitely want to jump into the kind of, I guess we could call it kind of pivot a little bit into the B2B space. But maybe before we do, if you could share more about, what were like the early days like when you first started? Did you kind of bootstrap it or raise capital? Just a little bit of context for us would be great.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I like to call my former employer our first seed investor because I think I spent 6 months at my old job doing a really bad job while really getting this off the ground. Kind of lock myself in my office and research insurance and other things that had nothing to do with my day job. And we did that for a while. It took. I was a first-time founder. I had 2 kids. I was paying preschool tuition. I have a mortgage. Like, I didn't think we could do this until we raised money. And so I think I had some grand delusions that we would go out and somebody would write us some big checks and then I would quit my job and get started on this. And we went out and did a few pitch meetings, and it was very clear that no one was going to bet on us until we bet on ourselves. And it took a while, but finally realized that this wasn't as big a risk as I thought, that, I was employable and that no matter what happened, like I wouldn't put my family out on the street. But it took several months for me to get there. And so once we did raise, we put some money into it. We also were, very fortunate to raise a friends and family round. And, we knew it wasn't enough, but it was enough to get us going. And we sort of, I was like, well, we'll just see whose bank account runs out first, like the company's or mine, or, we'll kind of figure this out. And we got started, and we just were as scrappy as possible. I mean, I had a friend of mine who was an engineer from AT&T Interactive. We'd worked together a number of years. He and I built the prototype, kind of while still having full-time jobs, late, nights and weekends. I product managed, he built it. And that was the core prototype of what we went out with. Once we had finally, once we did raise a little bit of money, we hired our first engineer, who then built off of that platform. But we did everything. It was a very small group, and we really did everything. I onboarded the first, I don't remember how many drivers myself. I drove, and which was great for learning what that experience was like and how hard it is to actually show up at a school that you've never been to before and figure out carpool lines and figure out how to find a child that you may not know what they look like. And then we're able to then go back and build into the experience solutions for those things and ways to make those things easier and better. And our kids were, test subjects. I remember we used to send engineers out as drivers to go pick up our own kids from school so that they could experience what that was like. And a lot of our first engineers did not have kids, did not particularly like kids. And so that was a very interesting experience for all around. But it was great learnings that then also helped us build. We were really about building empathy into the product and into the service for both care drivers and for families. And those early experiences, I think, really were key to making that happen.
And that definitely, I'm sure that was quite the experience for some of the engineers. So yeah, so on that kind of note too, I'm sure trust is probably a challenge early on. So how did you think about building trust, with your initial kind of first community of users?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the beginning, as we were designing the service, we built it with the question in mind, like, what would it take for us to use the service, right? Like, what would I need to see to put Jackson or Sam in a HopSkipDrive? And really kind of kept asking that until we were comfortable ourselves. And it really is all about, we think about safety and we think about trust. There's obviously the brand and what is the story behind the brand and how do you build the brand. Then there's the entire experience. And for us, it was, what is the experience before the ride? What is the experience during the ride? And really also, what is the experience kind of after the ride? And before the ride, it's obviously about care driver vetting. And so we asked ourselves, like, what would we need to see to feel comfortable having a person that we've never met, coming and picking up our children. And we like to say, this is really a caregiver who maybe you haven't met. So it's not too dissimilar from the bus driver, or really the way we thought about it was like maybe your friends, your child's friends nanny picking them up from school. So maybe you've never met that person, but that person has been vetted and is trusted by somebody that you know. And it was obviously we were going to need to do far more than many marketplaces do in terms of background checks. Fingerprinting was obviously very important, and we were the first rideshare company to fingerprint all of our drivers, and actually advocate for that with the PUC because kids are just different. And so we put together a 15-point certification process for background checking and vetting of care drivers. And what does that look like? And realize that we were doing far more than most families were doing to vet a nanny or a babysitter. But then it was also about, what are kind of the experiences that you need to have during the ride, right? How are parents going to be able to track the ride? And that's really everything from before the ride starts, because if your Uber or Lyft cancels on you, that's irritating. We cannot leave a child stranded somewhere. That's a safety issue. And that child the whole thing is designed for somebody who may or may not have a phone, and for somebody who doesn't set up the ride themselves, right? Because if your driver doesn't show up, a 7-year-old may not be able to whip out a phone and just order another one. And so we built this whole safe ride system, which is technology and a team that is monitoring every ride live in real time. And so that safe ride technology, makes sure that like there is a driver that has checked in, right? Which is our, that driver hasn't overslept feature, which, make sure that there's somebody who knows that this ride is happening and is on it and has committed to it and is on their way. But then all sorts of alerts and features throughout the ride, making sure that we know if a driver is going to be late to pick up and can communicate through automated alerts to everybody involved. All of those kinds of things. So it's not just the parent tracking the ride. There is a team also tracking that ride, which gives parents a lot of built-in comfort. Things like care drivers wear orange shirts, which helps identify and helps match. And then we call it our two-factor authentication system at pickup, right? When a care driver goes to pick up a child, the care driver gives the child a code word. Right. So this is a word that, like the care driver will say, "Hey, Jackson, I'm Margie, and your code word is Pokemon." Jackson knows, yep, that's the word my mom and I came up with. But then she asks another question, like, "What is your birthday?" And that's her way of verifying that this is the right Jackson and not the other Jackson in the classroom. So it's a two-factor system, but again, is designed where you don't need a phone to complete that. So just thinking all of that through, and then really leaning into the brand and into the, this was built by moms for families, for parents. Like this is what it would, we trust our own kids with the service. And I think that goes a long way towards creating that trust. And I think when we first started, we went out through, we went very locally, like we launched here in LA, and we went neighborhood by neighborhood. And so we would get involved in the neighborhood moms groups and the Facebook groups and get kind of some early evangelizers to talk about it and talk about why they used it and how they trusted it. Because hearing something word of mouth from another mom is very important to establishing that trust. And then I think we didn't realize it when we first launched, but I think we were also creating trust and safety on the other side of the platform as well. I mean, care drivers, I think, really like using HopSkipDrive because it's safe for them. They don't have to drive late at night. They don't have to drive drunk people. They're driving kids, which is a fairly safe passenger. And, I think that's that plus our vetting requirements. It's no surprise that care drivers are predominantly women, and they are looking to this as a way to make money that is safe for them. And frankly, something that they feel really good about and really drawn to from a mission standpoint as well.
Awesome. Sounds like a win-win for both sides. So
yeah,
I mean, I love how you even just the terminology that you use, just calling the care drivers versus saying drivers. So that definitely
yes.
goes a long way, I'm sure.
That was very intentional because we wanted really to think of them as caregivers first and drivers second. And we really call, when I think of this service, we are called in the press Uber for kids. We are not that. We are nowhere, nothing like that. What we are is caregivers on wheels. And what we are is really this ad hoc nanny that drives when you need her for just the amount of time that you need her. And so that care driver is very intentional.
Awesome. And then, so I did want to ask, as a marketplace, because we're all marketplace founders in the group, did you find that you were kind of supply constrained earlier or demand constrained or?
Yes. So, it's interesting because we are a very hyper local marketplace, right? Like even just in the city of LA, it's not about how many drivers you have in LA. It's I need this many drivers in Pasadena at 3:00 on a Tuesday. And that may be very different from how many drivers I need in Santa Monica on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And so it's very, the coupling and the matching of supply and demand is incredibly important in our marketplace. It's also interesting because our rides are not on demand. Our rides are prearranged. And so it's a prearranged marketplace, which allows us to do a lot of interesting things. And, our marketplace is a pull push hybrid, right? So care drivers actually can go into our marketplace and see rides available up to, I think, a week in advance, and they can pick the rides that they want and set their schedules. But then we also have the ability to push rides to them for anything that we need to get filled. And so that the way that technology works and the way that care drivers get used to using that and kind of going through the marketplace allows us to ensure rides specifically for our education partners and guarantee fill rate, which is something that is incredibly important. But we really think about that and use various tools to ensure that fill rate at a very hyper local level. And we take a city and we break it down into a number of regions and are really matching supply and demand at that real regional level.
Awesome. And was that more of a recent kind of, was that something that you guys recently did, or was that kind of from the beginning?
We really did that from the beginning. I think we saw, again, when we launched in LA, we were launching marketplace or region by region, and we knew that a lot of the demand was on the west side. It was a lot of private school kids going over the hill to get to private schools here in Los Angeles, and we knew that, and we were kind of testing it out on the east side to see how it worked. But we realized very quickly, particularly in a city like LA, that you need to, just because you have a pool of drivers, they're not necessarily willing to go across town to pick up a child. And so you really need to think about how much supply you have in a market. And at the beginning, we would cap demand as we were building new supply. So we had mechanisms on both sides of the marketplace to make sure that there was liquidity. But we definitely see that even now when we launch new markets or launch new areas, or even at various points in time, there's supply and demand imbalances. And so that the marketplace ops team is constantly focused on tweaking that supply and demand in very hyper local areas.
Got it. I know. I can only imagine how many questions we're going to have about this, because that's the quite the topic in the group. So I did want to ask, because we kind of briefly mentioned it before, as far as you kind of pivot as the business for a little bit. Could you maybe share more about the various stages of HopSkipDrive and maybe how it's evolved as a marketplace?
Yeah. So we started as a consumer marketplace, and we were really providing rides to families. And we grew pretty quickly in that marketplace. I think there is a lot of demand for that. I think it is hard to bring supply to that. And I think what we found was, families tend to be, there is a lot of regularity. And with kids, you are going to, you're going to school, you're going to soccer, you're going to dance, but the needs might be a little bit more ad hoc in terms of when exactly parents need to have the holes. I always think about, as parents, you're sort of Sunday night kind of thinking about the week and what the week looks like and figuring out your holes in that week. And it's hard to aggregate significant demand in that way, and it's very unpredictable. And so when you're thinking about matching supply and demand, it's just it becomes really challenging. And I think we saw that, like, the consumer business was never going to scale at venture, like the kind of venture scale that you would need. The margins, while much better than what you see in Uber and Lyft, were still pretty tight. What we realized was that there was this huge opportunity in the schools side of the world. And we started really with the private schools that we were driving kids to, but quickly discovered school districts have a lot of transportation needs that are federally mandated and highly individualized. And what I mean by that is students with special needs, students who, and on the students with special needs side, what that means is a student who has a child who has some type of special need. And that can be child has dyslexia, child is on the spectrum, to, child broke their leg and can't get on the school bus for a period of weeks, to, child has a physical challenge and might be in a wheelchair and needs specialized equipment. I mean, it's a very broad range, but those students will have individualized education plans. If their local school doesn't have services that they need, that plan might include transportation to another school in the district or even a non-public school that has those services. So you can imagine it might be really hard to route that child on a school bus, right? There are other students who are experiencing homelessness or who are in foster care who have the federally mandated right to stay at their school, regardless of what their housing situation might be. So you can imagine a child who's in foster care might move 4 to 5 times a year. And that can mean potentially switching schools. Credits don't transfer. That can lead to, it's one of the contributing factors to why the graduation rate is so low for some of these vulnerable populations. But one of the biggest barriers to these federally mandated rights is transportation. How are you going to get that child there? Child moves 20 miles away. Again, you can't reroute a school bus for that child. Or child moves at 10:30 at night. You cannot get that kid there the next day on a school bus, but a service like HopSkipDrive can be really helpful to ensuring that there is no transition in that child's education. And so this is a pretty big chunk of what school districts spend on transportation every single year. It's about $8 billion of a $25 billion market. School districts spend $25 billion a year on student transportation. And this is demand that is much more aggregated and much more scalable than the consumer side of the world. And so we realized that, and we realized that we were a great solution, and we were meeting this real unmet need in this market that has massive structural problems. There's a huge bus driver shortage. It's highly expensive. It's highly inefficient. And this was all pre-COVID. And, we're really finding product market fit. But it was interesting. We were a consumer business. Our apps were designed for consumers. A school district doesn't want to go into an app and set up rides for 200 kids, right? Like, that's a bad experience. School districts are not going to connect a credit card to Stripe to pay for this, right? And so we had to build an accounts receivable business, which created, by the way, a huge working capital issue, which we didn't realize at first, because districts they're great payers, but they pay like 45 days later. We are paying drivers weekly, right? And so now it's like, oh, that happened. But we needed to start invoicing. We needed to start collecting. We needed to build out Salesforce and hire a sales team to be able to reach all of these districts. I mean, it was a total transformation of our business and our team and our culture. And I have to say, I'm incredibly proud of how the team managed that. And most of the team made it through that transition. There were some people who were just like, I love consumer, I live consumer, I bleed consumer, and this really isn't for me. But it was a pretty big shift in every function of the org had to change pretty massively in some way, shape, or form. It was a pretty fascinating process to go through.
No, I can imagine. And yeah, I mean, it's a huge, huge amount of respect to you and the team for being able to do that. So I'm very curious to see, what were some of like the nuanced kind of, decision-making factors that went into that though?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. I mean, one, you could see, I think we realized that the consumer business just wasn't going to scale at the rate that we needed it to. And that's hard because we started this business to solve our own problem as parents, right? So it was hard to let that go. And we still have a consumer business. It's just fully organic. We don't invest in the customer acquisition of it. And it's still growing, but organically. But you could see that there was this great demand. The margins were much better. And you could see that it was something that was scalable and repeatable, and not just in the market that we were in, but like this could be our ticket to expanding to new markets. And this could really bring down the capital cost of expanding to new markets because you had contracts in hand and predictable demand. It changed our marketplace dynamics pretty significantly because, again, you have this aggregated demand of, you have this many kids, 180 days a year, 2 rides a day. I mean, it makes it much easier. We were able to release a lot of features that care drivers really love, like the ability to claim the same ride for a very specific, for a long period of time, and kind of routinize their schedules. It was sort of, there was really no, it really didn't feel like a choice, and it just became a much bigger it became a much bigger market opportunity, a much more exciting market opportunity. And frankly, from a mission and an impact standpoint, it was really exciting. I mean, we'd always been very mission driven, and our mission had always been to make families' lives easier. And when I look back on it, it was really about creating access to opportunity, right? Like access to opportunity for families where parents could continue to focus, to do what they need to do in their careers while not having their kids miss out on certain things, and helping kids get to the right school for them, and all of that. But we were serving let's be honest, an upper affluent clientele, which is totally fine. But what we do now is we are really helping some of our most vulnerable youth get access to equitable education. And we are seeing the outcomes of that, which are truly inspiring every single day, and that galvanizes the whole team. And it's just our mission now is really to create opportunity through mobility, and we do that every single day. And it's such a bigger and deeper meaning that we kind of ran towards.
Nice. Yeah, that's quite the mission. So I'm getting like super excited about it more now that I learned about it more. So I do have a question just on the business model side and from revenue as a marketplace. How has that changed now that you're working more directly with, I guess, the government and maybe the local school districts?
Yeah, I mean, the revenue model is still the same. We still make revenue on a per ride basis. It's just that we are contracting with districts on what those rides, look like, and we have a much better sense of how many rides that will be. And then, care drivers still get paid per ride, but we're able to manage all of that and manage the marketplace a much better and more efficient level.
Got it. And then, so you have some amazing investors on your cap table. So what was the fundraising journey like?
Oh, fundraising is never fun. I think fundraising has been incredibly hard every step of the way. I think we have been incredibly fortunate. We have some great investors, but shockingly, at the beginning, there were not a lot of believers in this idea of putting kids in cars with people they'd never met before, even though they're highly vetted caregivers, and first-time founders and female founders and founders in LA and not in Silicon Valley, and non-technical founders. I think we had like every check against us. But I think, we knew so deeply that this was a huge problem, and that we were the right people to solve it, and that we were solving it from the right perspective, which is the perspective of safety and trust and empathy. And we were able through that to find the right investors. And I think it was really important to find investors who believed in it, but investors also who understand that this isn't Uber or Lyft, that it grows and it does take off from a demand standpoint, but with a different margin profile, which is actually frankly much better than Uber and Lyft, but two, that like safety has to be important, and that there are times where we will turn away opportunities for growth because we think that they sacrifice certain aspects of the marketplace that we're not willing to sacrifice. And so that was very important from day one. But and we got the questions we got always, will people really do this? Will parents do this? Why won't Uber and Lyft do this? And just take your market. I got a lot of like, I have to go home and ask my wife about this. One of my favorites was, I don't know, each of my kids has their own driver. I just don't see a big market for this. That was my favorite objection. I was like, I don't think you're my target market.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine what that was like. So we're going to jump in here to questions in a little bit because I have a few that have messaged me that want to come on. But maybe before we do, I know you've had quite the journey, with building HopSkipDrive. But are there maybe any kind of key takeaways or learnings that as a marketplace founder you'd like to share with us as early stage marketplace founders?
Yeah, I think and we haven't really even talked about COVID, because COVID has certainly been fun for our marketplace. But I think, one is pay attention to what the marketplace is telling you. We love the consumer business, and the consumer business is still growing, and it could look like an interesting and exciting business. Um, but you had to pay attention to what the marketplace was telling you, and what the data was telling us and what the marketplace was telling us is that while it was attractive, it just wasn't going to get there. And what the marketplace was telling us was that the schools were this opportunity. And I think you really do have to listen to that. And it may not be what you initially set out to build, but it may be that you're actually solving a much deeper and much bigger problem than you ever realized or even knew existed. I think that's really important. Paying attention to both sides of the marketplace, and thinking about the values of which you are building, right? Like for us, again, it was safety, trust, empathy. It was very important to build our marketplace on that, but you have to build that on both sides, right? You can't just build that on the demand side. You have to pay attention to your supply side and care drivers. And what we discovered was that was very important on that side. So I think that was a very big, make sure that your values are on both sides of your marketplace. And then really think about, culture, I think, is so important. And I think that has never been truer during COVID, even in a remote world. But, we were able to make this transition when we first started telling the team, like, we're going to go to schools, because we had built a culture that was open and transparent and honest. We were able to walk them through like why we were making this decision and what it would entail, and we're able to pull it off pretty seamlessly. It was bumpy and it was a transition, but we were able to pull it off, and the team ran towards it instead of running away from it. I think because of the culture that we had built, and I think that has continued into what has been a tremendously difficult year, where most of our customers are actually closed. But the team and the culture that we've built have allowed us to run towards a lot of really exciting things, as opposed to running away from them.
Awesome. Those are some great insights and tips. So thanks for sharing that with us. And it definitely sounds like you've built quite the incredible kind of culture and mission with the team. So
thank you.
So we're going to jump into some group questions here. Hey, Kenny, did you want to come on?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. And thanks, Joanna, for the great talk. It's been very insightful so far. So I'm the founder of a marketplace called Mentor Pass, which connects early stage startup founders with a team of mentors for go-to-market advice, fundraising advice, product advice, everything like that. Our beachhead market is a B2C market, where we're finding folks that are leaving the corporate world and going to build their first startup. Our long-term vision is actually to go up market and go B2B and kind of B2B2C. So it sounds like a similar journey. We're doing this very intentionally because I think when we go B2C, we'll be able to build maybe a better brand and a better product, because we'll get faster feedback. Product needs to be maybe a little bit more sticky because there's not this long corporate budget. And so I'm just curious, were there benefits when you guys had to pivot that you reaped from initially going B2C? And if you could maybe explain some of those benefits, or maybe some things that backfired on you, anything like that as you made that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we learned how the service worked and how the product worked with consumers and got a ton of feedback that we built into, again, like the care driver vetting side and also the our safe ride technology and our safe ride support. I mean, we learned so much from some of those early, not early, we did consumer solo for about two and a half years and learned so much from all of that and really learned. I mean, one of the biggest things is we learned how schools work and how, and build that into our technology, right? So every time we do a pickup at a school, we're learning more about that location and the technology is getting smarter and it's able to kind of, for the next care driver that goes to that school, tell them, by the way, regardless of what information the parent put in there, which might be wrong, the pickup line is actually over here and you might want to get there 5 minutes early because it's going to be like all of that we can build in, which creates a better experience on both sides. You have a non-frustrated care driver and an experience that goes much better for the passenger. And I mean, it's interesting, even if the parents aren't paying for our service, and you talk about B2B2C, which I think is really important, even if the parent or the caregiver of the child is not paying for the service, they are still a customer, right? It is still their child in that car, even if the school district is paying. And so again, a lot of the trust and the empathy that we built in and knowing, you can't just notify the school. If it's a school district ride and something's happening, you can't just notify the school district. You need to notify the parents or whoever, the concept of having emergency contacts in there and all of these things that we built in when it was a consumer brand were tremendously helpful when we moved over. And not forgetting that like that is the ultimate customer, even if they're not the payer.
That's super helpful, and it sounds like hopefully the strategy of getting more feedback from the consumer side will hopefully work when we go up market.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Awesome. That was a great question. And thanks for sharing more on that, Joanna. So I think Dan has a question that's a great kind of follow-up on that. Do you want to come on, Dan?
Yeah. Hey, Joanna, thank you. So my marketplace is called Book Yaya. It's a live appearance marketplace for professional authors to meet with readers, sort of virtual events. And we are built B2C, and we are discovering that I'm exploring B2B2C, where I'm using libraries to promote events and to sort of quote unquote own the event a little bit. And it's unlocking a lot. And I'm in the process of really rethinking it as a B2B2C product as a result of that. So, hearing you talk about accounts receivables and, and just really the way you had to reinvent the business, it's really interesting. So my question is, can you tell us about how you negotiated that first deal with the first school, how that came about? Did you have your product in place because you had built it as B2C?
We had several failed iterations. And I think we also had to figure out who our customer was, right? I think we first thought it was private schools, and we kind of created this product for private schools. We were selling way before we had any product. I mean, we had no idea what we were doing. But that's okay, right? Because neither did the schools. We were kind of selling sort of a shuttle carpool type service where we could kind of pick up 4 kids, 3 to 4 kids at a time. And we were, the value proposition was helping private schools who didn't necessarily have busing or had like traffic, had to limit the number of cars at a pickup because of traffic issues. And it was the solution that we came up with was janky. I think we built a prototype in a weekend right before back to school and launched it. And then, the amount of manual effort that went into kind of making it work was painful. But we learned a lot from that. And I think it is feeding a lot of product work that is actually going on right now. That was kind of our first try at this. And then our first big contract was really with LA County. We have a contract with LA County Child Welfare Services to drive foster youth to the 88 school districts here in Los Angeles. That was the first time we did an RFP. And if you're going to be working with libraries, it sounds like that might be in your future. And there was a ton of learnings there. We did not have a dashboard at that point where schools could, where social workers could set up rides. I mean, it was, we were just basically having them call us, and we hired like 4 customer support people just to book rides as they were calling us. And I mean, it was totally janky, but it worked. And I will say in hindsight, like, I'm glad, we kind of developed this shuttle pass service for private schools in a weekend, and it was janky, and then went out to the market and learned that like it actually wasn't what they needed really at all. With our first foster contract, we just sort of did it as manually as possible, got a ton of learnings from that. And then we're like, hey, you know what? We actually need a dashboard where districts and counties can book their own rides. And like, what does that need to look like? And what are the use cases? And I think we by sort of waiting on it and doing it manually, I think we had much better learnings that went into the design. And we're able to think through like, oh, we're going to need different user permissions, and different people need to be managing. I mean, it changed really our whole database structure of thinking about what is, the rider versus the ride, and where data needs to live and how it needs to be structured. And we would not have built what we needed to solve the problem if we had built it up front. And so I totally think, kind of the fake it till you make it, get some stuff out there with the library, see what's working, and then see what you need to build and iterate from there. I think it's definitely that's what worked for us. Whether we knew we were doing that intentionally or not, that's what worked for us.
Thank you. That's what we're doing. We're winging it without it being built into the product.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Awesome. Those are really good questions. So, hey, so Joanna, I actually had a question for you myself, and that's, what was the team like prior to this kind of transition? And then what is it like now from like a product, maybe kind of sales and then operational standpoint?
Yeah. So the team, we've always had a fairly lean engineering team. And I'm skipping over a huge part actually, where we acquired the assets of Shuttle, which was another rideshare service for kids very early on. So in 2015, and kind of merged 2 technology platforms together. So that was a lot of fun. And went from a Node platform to a Ruby on Rails platform, and actually kind of transitioned the entire team. The team prior to the transition was really, we had a tech team, we had marketing folks, and marketing folks who were way more focused on kind of going out to local, like karate dojos and gymnastic studios and getting the word out. And then a driver ops team, and the driver ops team, and like, there wasn't as much communication as there is now, interestingly. Like like the 2 sides of the marketplace were much more separate than they are now. Now we had like no finance, right? Now we have a sales team of sales reps. We have a marketing team that is lead gen focused as well as driver acquisition focused. Ops is overseeing all sides of the marketplace. We've really built up our trust and safety teams. We now have a finance team and an amazing CFO. Do not wait to get a CFO as soon as you can. I thought I could cover it from my banking days, and I was just doing everything terribly. And so the team itself looks, the makeup of the team looks a lot different. There's a much bigger focus on sales. I think what hasn't changed is our Safe Ride support team, which is our service safety and support team, is kind of everything from customer service to our ride monitoring. And that team has always been pretty big, and it's variable. Like, it obviously increases with ride volume, but that team has always been core.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing about that. So I have a kind of follow up on that. So what's a day in the life of the CEO of HopSkipDrive like for you?
Oh man, every day is different. And yeah, every day is different, and it has changed. I find like every 6 months, my job changes pretty significantly as we head into a new phase. I mean, at the beginning, I was doing everything, right? I did every single job at the company. Other than coding, I'm not an engineer. I did build our first externally facing like Squarespace site. So I consider that my coding stint. But I was doing Safe Ride Support Ride Watch and watching rides at 10:30 on Saturday nights. I was driving, I was doing all the onboarding, I was doing all the marketing. Um, I attempted to write some legal documents, and my co-founder's a lawyer. She's like, don't ever do that again. But I was like, this contract's fine, right? She's like, no. Um, and then it changes as you grow, and then you start hiring people. And then it's about really finding people that are better than you and really thinking about the true culture you want to create. And it's always about, I say jokingly, I do four things, right? I spend 50% of my time hiring and recruiting. I spend 50% of my time evangelizing the business and doing PR and talking with people. I spend 50% of my time fundraising, and I spend 50% of my time in doing strategy. And obviously those don't add up. And so your job just changes. I mean, this last year, my job has really been about survival and making sure that the company is positioned to get us to the point where schools open again. And that meant making some really, really hard decisions, and unfortunately letting go of half the team in August when schools didn't come back, which was really, really tough. That meant really thinking deeply about culture and maintaining culture as we move to a remote world, and keeping everybody's spirits up when people are at home with small kids or people are living by themselves, and just kind of keeping everyone together, to really thinking about strategy and where our market is going and what it's going to look like and how we're going to be best suited to meet it, and to meet the demand that we know is coming. And as more schools open in more states. So it changes constantly. And I think it's also about being aware that it's going to change constantly and being okay with that.
Yeah, definitely. So on that note, I think we're going to wrap up the group questions. I definitely want to be conscious of time. But could you maybe share, what's coming up for a HopSkipDrive in the near future?
Yeah. So like I said, this has been a really hard year. We saw schools shut down in March, and our market went to zero, like literally overnight. Schools have come back in some markets, and I think it has allowed us, and it's been a really, really hard year, but I think there's a big silver lining to it. I think one, we're coming out of COVID a much stronger company and a much better company. We did, unfortunately, have to let a lot of people go. That forced us to be much more productive and much more efficient in everything that we do, and has really accelerated our path to profitability. I think it also allowed us to take a step back and really look at the state of the industry that we play in, which is student transportation, and understand the really big underlying shifts that are happening in that industry, and help us position ourselves to take advantage of those as schools open. I actually think the opportunities for HopSkipDrive are better than ever and bigger than ever. And I'm really, really excited about that. And so then making sure that we're positioned to take advantage of that and doing what we need to do. I'm very grateful as schools are starting to open and we see volume returning, and have needed to start hiring again. We've been able to rehire. So we've been able to bring people back. And I think that's also a testament to our culture, that people, that we laid off want to come back, and that that we're thrilled to have them back. So yeah, for us now, it's only February, but we're gearing up for back to school in a big way. We're seeing more and more openings. California will get there eventually. It's not there yet, but a lot of the markets that we are in, kids are going back to school and are doing it safely. And I think we've really established ourselves as an industry expert and a thought leader in the space of safety, including COVID safety. And I'm really proud of that.
Yeah, well, you definitely should be. So this is a super interesting chat, and it's awesome to hear more about HopSkipDrive, and I think it also is worth noting that you're kind of a pioneer in the space in the early days too. So yeah,
We were.
yeah. So I did have a last kind of question for you, and what's maybe one memorable moment that stands out over the course of the years in HopSkipDrive?
Oh man, there are so many that stand out. Um, Literally, there are so many that stand out. I think, you know, I think one of the most memorable years. I'll leave you with this. We had a partnership with Casa of Los Angeles, who is they're a nonprofit that works with foster youth, and we helped them get a grant from General Motors. It was a $200,000 grant for free rides for Casa youth. So this was a way that CASA advocates who are working with these kids could get rides to anything that wasn't school, right? So, sibling visits or after school activities or doctor's appointments. And this really helped. There was a foster youth named Randy who, despite a lot of really bad things that had happened in her life, was really thriving and really doing well, and was in the process of applying for a very prestigious internship. And in the midst of that, she moved foster placements and was now 40 miles away and was at real risk of having to drop out of this scholarship process because she had no way of getting to the interviews. And because of this grant and because of this program, her CASA advocate was able to use HopSkipDrive to get her to these interviews and keep her in the running. And Randy was one of 60 recipients of a Posse scholarship that year. She was the only foster youth that got a Posse scholarship, and she now has a full ride to the University of Wisconsin. And this is a story that we tell at HopSkipDrive a lot because it's a great reminder for us that the difference between struggle and success can sometimes be as simple as the ability to get there. And that is what we do every single day. And we are doing that for thousands of kids every single day. And that was a real, like, hearing that story was a real moment for me of like, this is exactly why we do what we do. And one of the things that I'm most proud of.
Yeah, you definitely should be. That's an incredible story. So might ask you if you're hiring now. So but yeah, that was a great way to wrap it up. And wow, I mean, thanks again for taking the time to join us and share more. So just before we leave though, where can time for a quick kind of plug, where can we keep up with you?
Yeah, we are on all of the social, talking about what we do, and Twitter, LinkedIn. We tend to post a lot about schools and education and equity and some of the things that we're doing to help bring more equity to some of the kids who need it most.
Awesome. Well, I'll include the links in the video recording with the group. So, but cool. Well,
Excellent.
thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us. So this is a really fun chat, and
Thank you.
we'll all be rooting for you in the group. So
Thank
awesome.
you, and thank you to everybody, and good luck with all the marketplaces that you're building. Sounds like some really exciting stuff going on.